This case is all about the efforts of the Russian Federation to gain pernicious global influence using social media to enlist saboteurs vast distances from Moscow. Physically, no borders were crossed, and no Russian national was exposed to discovery or capture. Technology means that the national interest of the United Kingdom is under threat from innovative and rapidly proliferating strategies employed by those who have the resources and wish to undermine our peace and security. The hidden hand of the internet delivered results because anonymous recruiter proxies operating through internet chat rooms, usually on encrypted platforms, found within the United Kingdom young men who are prepared to undergo a form of radicalization and betray their country for what seemed easy money. Dylan Earl and Jake Reeves were able to muster a group who carried out a serious act of criminal damage intended by their paymasters to impair the delivery of aid to Ukraine. They planned further grave crimes to intimidate, undermine, and frighten those speaking up for Ukraine, which were prevented through police disruption. The overall picture giving rise to this investigation is a very serious one indeed. It is interference in the lives of people in Britain by a foreign power leveraging the greed and base instincts of unsophisticated individuals. Relations between Ukraine and the United Kingdom have existed since Ukrainian independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. The two countries enjoy close political, military, and economic cooperation. Ukraine is an ally that Britain is supporting at very significant cost in a war that has now raged for 3 years. In past years, our parents and grandparents would have had a simple term for what Dylan Earl and Jake Reeves did: treason. Together with Nii Kojo Mensah, they arranged for a nighttime arson attack on a warehouse in East London, where Earl knew that property and aid destined for Ukraine, including satellites, was held. Mensah, Jakeem Rose, and Ugnius Asmena carried it out. Then the attention of Earl and Reeves was directed towards a prominent Russian dissident businessman who was targeted for kidnap, and his business premises in Mayfair for arson attacks. Earl prepared, and Reeves lent himself to the plot, albeit in the end he did little more than re-recruit Mensah for it, his friend. Thus it was that 5 of these 6 offenders played a part in an enterprise which was intended to promote the interests of a foreign power in its war of aggression against Ukraine. The 6th, Ashton Evans, became aware of the entire enterprise as a result of his drug dealing contact with Earl. But rather than do his duty to report and prevent Earl's activities, he encouraged him and hoped to profit himself. One of the important matters that the court must determine is the extent to which the sentences imposed on these 6 offenders for the various offences they've committed should reflect the context I have described in relation to Earl, even if they were unaware of it at the time of their offending. I've been greatly assisted by detailed sentencing notes and accompanying materials from the parties and their oral submissions. Sentencing any offender has to be tailored to each individual. I want to make it clear that I have read all the material provided to me, much of it more than once. I do not intend to mention every document I've seen or every submission that has been made to me. I will now call the defendants by their last names, and I mean no discourtesy by that. The facts. On after 11th after 11:30 on the 20th of March 2024, a fire was set using an accelerant, petrol, at a warehouse on the Cromwell Industrial Estate in East London. The result was extensive damage to 2 of the warehouses, together with the accompanying risk to life in the surrounding urban area and to those who were close by and whose public duty it was to attend the scene. 8 fire engines were required, with 60 firefighters. Nearly £200,000 of loss was sustained by the occupants of the warehouses. Together with the costs of the insurance claim in respect to the damage to the property and the remedial works associated, the overall damage is approximately £1.3 million. For the companies using the warehouses, the arson meant disruption, relocation, and fear on the part of staff. The attack on the warehouse was commissioned by the terrorist organisation, the Wagner Group, which was proscribed on the 15th of September 2023. It had been a private military contractor funded by and closely connected to the Russian state. That connection became closer when in June 2023, following an attempted coup against the Russian government, it was taken under the direct control of the Russian leadership apparatus. The knowledge it had gained was put to good use. Intelligence activities, including the garnering of potential individual non-state actors in European countries, was one of its new roles. Earl was one of those. On the 23rd of June 2023, he made contact with the Wagner Group by joining a broadcast channel called AP Wagner Chat on the social messaging application Telegram. It had 47 other members. The content of the messaging was in Russian, and the channel promoted pro-Russian propaganda. Telegram offers regular and highly private chat modes called secret chats. Secret chats are end-to-end encrypted, so that only the sender and receiver can see the content. If messages are deleted by one side to the correspondence, they're deleted on both sides. Group chats for up to 200,000 participants are offered, as are channels for broadcasting to unlimited audiences. On Telegram, Earl was a member of numerous pro-Russian propaganda channels. He quickly became connected to 2 profiles or handles called PrivateBot and Lucky Strike. Earl knew that those he was communicating with were supportive of Russia in the war against Ukraine, and he was tempted by the offer of money to carry out missions, of which the attack in East London was the first one achieved. Prior to the 20th of March, Earl was telling online contacts that he was working for a PMC, a private military company, and he would pay well for intelligence. On the 12th of March, for example, one of the contacts said that he was a member of the United Kingdom Armed Forces and could get whatever information Earl's superiors wanted, as long as it was nothing too crazy. On the 16th of March, PrivateBot asked Earl if he could get access to bank accounts containing money destined for Ukraine, or, demonstrating awareness of some of the United Kingdom's actions against Russia, asking if he could get hold of Russia's money that has been frozen and is to be transferred to Ukraine. PrivateBot asked him for those who are our kindred spirit. The target industrial estate was selected because of its connection to Ukraine. The businesses based in the warehouses attacked, Odyssey Limited and Meest UK Limited, in Units 1 and 2 respectively, were concerned in logistics, frequently delivering goods to Ukraine, including Starlink satellite equipment. This had been part of its operations since mid-2022. Large lorries would leave the warehouses once or twice a week, each containing at least 1,500 parcels. The warehouses were also used to organise humanitarian aid efforts to support Ukraine. This attack in East London was not isolated. The day afterwards, Earl was telling another of his online contacts, they have a warehouse in Czech Republic to burn for 35,000, although he expressed doubt that his contact had anyone able to do that. On the 24th of March, he was in contact with someone who claimed to be in Europe and able to get to the Czech warehouse. 10 days after the London warehouse was set alight, another warehouse owned by Behest in Spain was the subject of arson with the use of an accelerant. Returning to the 20th of March, Earl, who lived in Leicester, offered a contact Reeves the mission. At that time, Reeves, who lived in Croydon, was not himself aware of the background, but without knowing what the warehouse was used for, what might be stored there, and what the potential consequences of a fire might be, he recruited his real-life friend Mensah. Mensah himself was put in contact with Earl. He was sent images of the location. He put together a simple plan, 3 men and a car. He invited Rose, who lived near him in Thornton Heath, South London, and Asmena, who was then in South-West London. These 3, together with a driver Asmena knew through his mother, drove to the warehouse, picking up petrol on the way. Mensah and Rose were captured by CCTV carrying out the arson, Rose splashing petrol around the outside of the warehouse and lighting it, while Mensah filmed him on his mobile phone and live-streamed it to Earl. Asmena stayed in the car with the driver and all 4 drove away. Rose had dropped a zombie-type knife during the attack. One of the lorries was parked very close to the warehouse, and the driver, Mr. Harrison, was in it. He tried bravely and persistently to put the fire out, and he's also seen on the CCTV as the fire flares up and takes hold. The court commends his courage and persistence. The Cromwell Industrial Estate is surrounded on 2 sides by residential properties, including just 5 metres from the wall of the warehouse, a block of offices with residential flats on top. People in the flats soon realised what was happening. The emergency services were called, and the flats were initially evacuated before being allowed back in. No one was hurt, but it is unsurprising that the jury convicted Mensah, Rose and Asmena of the aggravated offence. 20 minutes after the fire was started, Mensah messaged Earl to tell him both warehouses 1 and 2 were lit. Mensah watched the news breaking online and quickly began to chase Earl for payment. He and Reeves did so over subsequent weeks, but it seems that the clumsy way the arson had been carried out did not satisfy Earl's principals, who criticised it and apparently refused to pay the full fee promised. Subsequently, Earl's contact with the Wagner profiles continued. His attention was drawn to 2 businesses belonging to the prominent Russian dissident and refugee living in London, Hedonism, a wine shop, and a restaurant, Hyde. The owner, Yevgeny Chikvarkin, has been vocal in his criticism of President Putin and the war against Ukraine. Earl commissioned reconnaissance of the 2 premises in Mayfair. The jury was shown that footage at the trial, and the individual doing it, not in the dock, was clearly trying to capture the location, the layout, and surroundings with some care. Earl approached Reeves, who was now fully aware of what was behind Earl's requests. Indeed, Reeves boasted about it to a close friend and sent in photographs of Earl's stash of drugs, subsequently found by the police on Earl's arrest. The plans they hatched included kidnapping the Russian businessman, Earl telling Reeves that the target should be captured so he could be exiled to Russia to face prison. In turn, Reeves re-recruited Mensah, sending him a video of an improvised explosive device and asking if he knew anyone who could carry out an explosion in Mayfair for £20,000 to £30,000. Reeves remained in communication with Earl, and messages between them made it clear that he wanted to be paid for his part in the arson, and also that he was prepared to consider further tasking. When he was in communication with the friend he boasted to, he made it clear he was in contact with someone who had jobs for him for Wagner, and the kind of jobs were those that could lead to being prosecuted for terrorism. PrivatBot had told Earl that the next fire had to be properly approved by him, and he had to be told the place and time in advance. Reeves was arrested on the 18th of April of last year, Mensah on the 19th of April. He made no comment in interview. Rose was arrested on the 1st of August. A bladed article in a sheath was found in his bedroom, also described as a zombie-type knife with a 66-centimetre blade. Asmena was arrested the same day. Throughout the time, Earl had also been in communication with another online contact, Ashton Evans, who was living in South Wales. Initially, Evans wanted to buy cocaine from Earl, who was a drug dealer. They exchanged messages on iMessage between the 19th of February 2024 and the 20th of March. Then on Snapchat and Signal until Earl's arrest on the 10th of April. Much of this communication has not been recovered. Earl was forensically aware and told Evans too to delete messages. After Earl's arrest, Evans disposed of his phone. From the limited records recovered, it appears that in February their contact was in relation to drug supply. But by March they were discussing Earl's other activities, particularly those for the Wagner Group. On the 12th of March, Earl sent Evans Grey Zone, the name of a pro-Russia Telegram channel which has been the mouthpiece of the Wagner Group since at least 2022. It has over 500,000 subscribers, and it has been used to publicise recruitment messages for the Wagner Group. In 2023 and 2024, at least 8 advertisements were published on the Grey Zone channel, inviting people in European countries to join the battle against Ukraine's Western supporters, and to that end, to communicate with a Telegram user called PrivatBot. The following day, there were unrecovered messages between Earl and Evans. Evans was sent part of the postcode for the Cromwell industrial estate 3 days before the arson, so Evans was aware of the attack on the warehouse in East London in advance. On the afternoon of the 20th of March, the day before the arson, Evans took on a social media profile in the name of Alexander Solonik. An internet search during the investigation revealed that the first result describes this person as a Russian gangster, known for his reputation as a notorious hitman in the Russian criminal underworld. On the 23rd of March, Evans asked Earl whether it had been lit up. He then offered to arrange reconnaissance for Earl, who responded that he should get it done with full video recording. There's no evidence that Evans did this, but he continued to discuss the second task with Earl, at one point marvelling that, quote, they only paying 40k for a man worth $1 billion. On the 30th of March, Earl tried to recruit Evans for the Mayfair task, telling him that it was Mazza-level insane. When Evans asked him to define insane, Earl sent him a video of a contraption which he said would cost less than £150 to make, and Evans responded that he would get it done for £25,000 his side. Earl agreed the price. He told Evans it was a wine shop with £20 million of stock, adding, in a series of messages, the thing is, there's houses above, 120 feet above, so maybe find a way so no one harmed. There's no need to hurt anyone, just send a message, but it's always a risk. He observed that there would be a great deal of publicity and heat after this attack. Evans said he could sort it if there was a way to do it without people getting hurt, because otherwise it would be terror-level serious. Earl agreed that every single spy agency would be trying to find out who did the attack in Mayfair. Both of them expressed a desire to avoid anyone being hurt, and Evans asked if it had to be an explosion or whether a fire was possible. Earl told him that the target billionaire had been on the news saying that Russian agents were following him and using a fire was possible rather than an explosion, but if the building didn't fully burn, he would not be paid more than 25%. It needed to be reduced to ashes, to have to be fully knocked down so that it needed rebuilding. The two men discussed improvised explosives. Earl told Evans he would have 4 or 5 minutes to get away, and he offered to provide a full plan and satellite images too. Earl asked Evans if he could put him in touch with the IRA or the Kinahan crime family, a transnational organised crime syndicate. Evans said he didn't have any IRA contact, but he could help with the Kinahans, and he would speak to someone. When Evans was arrested on the 22nd of May, £1,500 in cash and 22 snapbags of cocaine amounting to 8.26 grams at 20% purity, worth about £500 at street value, were found together with drug-dealing paraphernalia. He told police in an interview that his conversations with Earl were all aimed at stringing him along to get a refund for some poor-quality drugs that Earl had supplied to him. The sentencing exercise raises a number of discrete topics relevant to one or more of the offender, and the court has had to consider a broad range of materials. Whether the arson was aggravated by reason of a terrorist connection, as set out in Section 69 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Whether the foreign power condition described in Section 69A of the Act applies. Whether any offender is dangerous as defined by the Sentencing Act, and the imposition of a life sentence is justified. Whether alternatively the requirements for a serious terrorism sentence or an extended sentence are met. Offence-specific Sentencing Council guidelines for arson, possession of a bladed article, failure to disclose information about acts of terrorism, possession of Class A drugs with intent to supply, and money laundering have been the subject of submissions, all of which I have considered. As there is no guideline for National Security Act offences, I've had regard to the general guideline, overarching principles, as well as to the statutory description of the purposes of sentencing adults described in Section 57 of the Sentencing Act. The prosecution have also referred the court to cases considered by the Court of Appeal for other offences with comparable agreements, such as preparing acts of terrorism, contrary to Section 5 of the Terrorism Act 2006, as well as the Council's guideline for that offence, and spying offences contrary to the 1911 and 1989 Official Secrets Acts. I have regard to the reduction in sentence for guilty pleas, and for those offenders facing more than one count, I have close regard to the principle of totality, which means that sentences for multiple offences, whether ordered to be served consecutively or concurrently, must be just and proportionate overall, reflecting the offending. Each of these 6 men is under the age of 25, and 3 of them were under 21 at the time of the offences. I have pre-sentence reports for each of them except Ashton Evans, and in each case I have considered carefully whether and to what extent their age, maturity and personal features such as neurodevelopmental disorders should impact on my assessment of their culpability, relying on the relevant guidelines as appropriate. The aggravated arson at the warehouses in East London carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. The offence is aggravated in respect of Earl because he knew it was carried out for and on behalf of a foreign power, and he intended it to benefit that foreign power, Section 69A of the Sentencing Act. A parallel aggravating feature is relevant, pursuant to Section 69 of the Act, because the offence also meets the criteria for an act of terrorism. There is no doubt that the offence committed by Dylan Earl had such a connection, and Mr. Hines, King's Counsel, has not submitted to the contrary. However, the prosecution invites the court to conclude that this offence is aggravated by reason of having a terrorist connection in the case of all 5 relevant offenders. The Crown's reasoning is that although none of the protagonists, apart from Earl, knew at the time that the arson was set that the warehouse had been targeted because of its role in supporting Ukraine during the war, or intended their actions to be terrorist in nature, the acts they carried out were indeed acts of terrorism. The arson involved serious damage to property. It was designed by those who commissioned and procured it to intimidate a section of the public, those who provide support to Ukraine, and it was arranged for the purpose of advancing a political cause. Mr. Blaxland, King's Counsel for Reeves, contested this submission, and his arguments were adopted by counsel for Mensah, Rose and Asmena. He does not argue that the arson did not have a terrorist connection, but submits that before that can be treated as an aggravating feature in the cases of the defendants apart from Earl, who knew its true purpose, the prosecution would have to have proved a terrorist purpose on the part of each participant. As he put it, absent purpose, there is no terrorism. As the prosecution does not suggest that the aggravation applies by reference to Section 69A, which identifies aggravation by connection to the foreign power condition in the 2023 Act, and it is accepted by the prosecution that Reeves and the other 3 arsonists did not know the purpose behind the arson until afterwards, it would be unfair and unjustified for a terrorist connection in the case of Earl to infect the culpability of his co-defendants. I agree that there is a terrorist connection, and I reject the proposition that unless the offender knows the design of or purpose behind his action, such a connection cannot be found. Section 69(3) applies where a court is considering the seriousness of an offence, and it provides, for the purposes of this section, an offence has a terrorist connection if the offence, A, is or takes place in the course of an act of terrorism, or B, is committed for the purposes of terrorism. For this purpose, terrorism has the same meaning as in the Terrorism Act 2000. See Section 1 of that Act. In my judgment, there is no requirement for the offender who is part of committing an offence which is in fact for the purposes of terrorism to have personal knowledge of the purpose behind the offence before it can be treated as an aggravating feature. Motive is not an ingredient of aggravated arson, but the motive for which a crime is commissioned has the potential to increase its gravity. The individual who commits a criminal offence may not know the whole context in which the offence is taking place. That's the risk that he takes. But the harm caused and the overall seriousness of the offence may well go beyond what the protagonist is aware of. In non-terrorist related cases, this will be catered for when determining the seriousness of the offence, either in respect of culpability, for example, if the individual was reckless as to the true nature of the offence he agreed to commit, or it may go to harm. To take an example relating to harm, a burglar may be commissioned to steal a locked case from a private cloakroom. He doesn't know what the case holds or why he's been asked to steal it, and he doesn't much care. If it contains no more than the cloakroom attendant's lunch, that will cause a degree of harm to the well-being of the attendant. However, if known to those who commission the offence but not the person who carries it out, it holds vital medicine intended for a gravely ill person, it would be a much more serious offence, even though the burglar didn't have a clue that that was what the case contained. In that sense, the burglar takes the risk. He takes the briefcase as he finds it, because he has agreed to commit the offence for the price offered. The graver harm caused than he intended may well aggravate his offence. Indeed, Section 63 of the Sentencing Act provides, when assessing seriousness, where a court is considering the seriousness of any offence, it must consider A, the offender's culpability in committing the offence, and B, any harm which the offence A, at 1, caused, 2, was intended to cause, or 3, might reasonably have caused. Where terrorism offences are under consideration, Parliament has decided that this should have consequences for the perpetrator who does not necessarily know the full nature of his offence. Another example. A simple kidnapping may be carried out by a gang of criminals who are ignorant of the fate intended for the victim. They act in the enterprise for financial reward, only discovering later that the man who commissioned them carried out his intention to force the victim to wear a suicide vest and walk into a crowded election rally as part of a political terrorist campaign. Their offence of kidnapping has a terrorist connection, though they didn't know it at the time. It is a graver offence as a result. Terrorism of all kinds has impact well beyond the discrete consequences of the harm done to the persons or property in terms of damage or injury. In this case, Mikhail and Yelena Boykov, who owned and directed the companies targeted in the arson, were victims solely because of their legitimate political beliefs and support for Ukraine. They're likely to feel threatened far beyond the immediate effect of the fire. The adverse impact on other sympathisers of the Ukrainian peoples, and indeed those ethnically Ukrainian in the United Kingdom, is also a real consequence. Frequently, terrorist attacks cause wide interference with ordinary life, and in this case, each of the elements of the definition of terrorism in Section 1 of the Terrorism Act 2006 could be satisfied. Section 69 of the Act self-evidently does not require a terrorist offence to be charged, as here. And there are sound reasons why those who agree to commit an offence which is unknown to them, an act of terrorism, should be treated as having committed a more serious offence than if that crime had not had that particular overlay of gravity. Parliament has captured this overlay in Section 69. As Mr. Penny, King's Counsel, observed, there is a clear distinction between Section 69 and Section 69A. The latter, which was inserted by the National Security Act 2023, states that for any offence which is not an offence under that Act, or an offence covered by Section 16 of that Act, if the foreign power condition is met in relation to the conduct that constitutes the offence, the court must treat that as an aggravating factor and state that it has been so treated in open court. The foreign power condition is found in Section 31 of the National Security Act, which provides in subsection 1, for the purposes of this part, the foreign power condition is met in relation to a person's conduct if A, the conduct in question or a course of conduct of which it forms a part is carried out for or on behalf of a foreign power, and B, the person knows, and having regard to other matters known to them, or having regard to other matters known to them, ought reasonably to know that to be the case. This wording expressly requires that the person know or ought to have known that the conduct was being carried out on behalf of a foreign power. That is not a requirement in Section 69. Mr. Blaxland's response to this point is that the actual or constructive knowledge is spelt out in Section 69A because purpose is not an ingredient of National Security Act offences. I do not accept that submission. Section 69A specifically excludes offences under the National Security Act at subsection 2A. Indeed, the foreign power condition, as defined in Section 31 of that Act, is an additional ingredient in many of the offences under it, such as obtaining or disclosing protected information, contrary to Section 1, sabotage under Section 12, and the offence to which Reeves pleaded guilty, obtaining, etc., material benefits from a foreign intelligence service, contrary to Section 17, subsection 2. Parliament has specified that offences which are not offences under any terrorism legislation, if they satisfy the requirements of Section 69, are aggravated by being connected to terrorism, and there is no requirement for the offender who commits the connected offence to have any terrorist purpose. Plainly, declaring that an offence has a terrorist connection will not necessarily mean that the offender will be treated as if he intended to commit such an offence. On the facts of this case, the relevance of the terrorist connection is to the level of harm that was caused. but the degree to which that feature aggravates any individual's position will be mitigated by his lack of knowledge or intent to commit such an offence. Furthermore, there is an overlap with one of the offence guideline aggravating features, namely the presence of serious consequential economic or social impact of the offence. It would be unfair for those consequences to be double counted, and I bear that in mind. However, I state that the offence of aggravated arson is to be treated as connected to terrorism. This is a category B1 offence. The offenders were reckless as to whether life was endangered and a very high level of damage was caused. It was an unsophisticated offence. The starting point is 6 years imprisonment. I will return to other aggravating and mitigating features when I come to sentence each defendant. The Sentencing Act requires the court to consider whether the imposition of a life sentence is justified. Having considered the position with care, the only offenders for whom detailed assessment is required are Dylan Earl and Jake Reeves. The National Security Act 2023 offences have not yet been the subject of a Sentencing Council guideline. Had the preparations Earl and Reeves made come to fruition, they would have involved serious violence against a Russian dissident and likely endangered the lives of those at or in proximity to his businesses. Earl arranged reconnaissance of the targets and sought to recruit individuals to carry out the planned attacks. The messages he exchanged with PrivateBot demonstrate he was prepared to corrupt an individual who stated he was a serving UK soldier to obtain intelligence for the Wagner Group. He was prepared to try and obtain banking information about European residents. He sought to arrange the burning down of a warehouse in the Czech Republic, and he discussed kidnapping a billionaire for the purpose of extortion. This sequence of actions and agreements are rightly described as a planned campaign of terrorism and sabotage on UK soil and elsewhere in support of a foreign power and its goals, regardless of the impact on the people targeted and wider British life. Reeves was prepared to accept money from the Wagner Group. Indeed, both of them acted for financial gain, as well as Earl's sometimes expressed ideological alignment with Russia's interests. I recognise that each offender is still below the age of 25 and their brains are still developing. Each will have gained a greater level of maturity by now than they had at the time of the offending. When I deal with them individually, I will highlight any particular aspects in this respect. I will now deal with ancillary orders. I make the surcharge order against each offender. I initiate confiscation proceedings against Earl and Evans and set the timetable proposed by the prosecution. Section 18 and 18A notices by the 23rd of October, the defence disclosure statement under Section 18 by the 20th of November, any interested person's disclosure statement under Section 18A by the same date. I direct Julie Earl, Dylan Earl's mother, to provide such a statement because it will be necessary to determine in due course the extent to which she holds money for her son in her bank account. The prosecutor's statement by the 8th of January 2026, the defence Section 17 response by the 19th of February, the prosecutor's supplementary response by the 19th of March, and a mention in court to arrange listing on the 2nd of May. I have regard to the power to make a compensation order in favour of those who suffered loss in the arson at the warehouses in Leyton. I adjourn consideration of that order until the confiscation proceedings are completed, simply because funds may well be confiscated which can be applied to compensation as a priority. In light of the submissions I have heard, I do not adjourn consideration of the serious organised crime protection orders as requested on behalf of some of the offenders. The prosecution has responded to the queries about the terms included, and that clarification assists me to deal with the orders on a bespoke basis. As I shall indicate, I find the test satisfied in the cases of Earl and Reeves only, as I'll explain when I come to their cases. and I impose the orders in the terms drafted. In Dylan Earl's case, I order that the offence of assisting a foreign intelligence service contrary to Section 3(1) of the National Security Act shall lie on the file subject to the usual terms. This is because the conduct underlying that charge is being taken into account when I sentence Earl for the other offences today. Similarly, I order that the offence of preparatory conduct contrary to Section 18 of the National Security Act shall lie on file subject to the usual terms in respect of Reeves, because I will consider the totality of his conduct too when I sentence him. Notification will apply to each offender. I make the orders for deprivation and forfeiture as requested by the Crown. These are set out in schedules provided by the prosecution so that certainty is achieved. The items include knives, mobile devices, drugs, and drug paraphernalia. Insofar as cash and certain property in Earl's possession is concerned, I postpone the making of a deprivation order until resolution of the confiscation proceedings. The offenders. I turn now to the sentences to be imposed alongside the ancillary orders I've already made or dealt with by making directions for. The defendants were aged between 19 and 22 years at the relevant time. 4 of them are of previous good character. For most, being remanded in custody has been their first experience of being deprived of their liberty. They are to be sentenced for serious offences. Each of these 6 young men should appreciate that the court understands the impact on them, their families and their loved ones of being before the court today. For each of them, I take into account that people who know them well see finer qualities in them than were on display in the events that I've been describing. I must sentence Nii Kojo Mensah for the aggravated arson, which in his case was after a trial. The culpability in your case is higher than for the 2 other men who were in the car because you recruited them. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment. The arson is aggravated by the use of an accelerant, and this being a group offence committed at night, and in your case by your significant role in recruiting 2 others. You recorded the offence and live-streamed it to Earl on Telegram. Subsequently, you celebrated its newsworthiness. I find some but not a significant degree of planning or premeditation in your case, and nor do I find that multiple people's lives were endangered. The risk to some life is reflected in the aggravated nature of the offence itself. It is an offence with a terrorism connection, and this provides some moderate further aggravation beyond the serious consequential economic and social impact of the offence for the reasons I have explained. I've read the pre-sentence report. In terms of mitigation, you were 21 years old at the time, you're 23 now. You are of previous good character. I bear in mind that you pleaded guilty to simple arson on the 17th of January this year, and the stage in the proceedings at which you did that. But you were convicted of the more serious offence. You didn't give evidence at the trial. You told the probation officer that you were offered £20,000 by Reeves, who you knew from college. As you were off work with a leg injury, you agreed to take part in the arson. There's no evidence that you ever received that money, but you were quite prepared, once you did know what the background had been, to contemplate engaging with Reeves and Earl in similar organised crime for money. I've read the letter you wrote to me. In it, you tell me that you were in a construction apprenticeship and attending college when you made the poor decisions that find you before the court today. You are sorry for your reckless, inconsiderate crime. You have used your time in custody effectively, engaging wholeheartedly in the programmes and workshops available, and I commend your efforts. As I've already said, I do not find that you satisfy the statutory test for a dangerous offender. I've also not found that the prosecution has satisfied the requirements for the imposition of a serious crime prevention order in your case. The sentence I have to impose on you will provide protection for the public for some years, and I do not consider the single offence of aggravated arson in your particular circumstances one that should be treated as if it were specified under the Serious Crime Act 2007. I have to sentence Jakeem Rose for an offence of aggravated arson contrary to Section 1(2) of the Criminal Damage Act 1971, and for possession of a bladed article in a public place contrary to Section 131 of the Criminal Justice Act 1988. The maximum sentence for the latter offence is 4 years imprisonment. I've seen a pre-sentence report dated the 15th of October 2025. I take heed of your neurodivergence in that you have ADHD and are more likely to act impulsively than the average person without that condition. Agreement to commit this offence may have been impulsive, but the carrying out was not. You had to be collected in a car with Mensah, then travel to the warehouse, stopping on the way to get petrol for the fire. I do not find that your culpability is diminished to any significant extent. I bear in mind your age and Dr. Brown's conclusion that you are less mature than others of your age, and also your adverse life experiences, including a serious trauma by stabbing. It is a great shame that your response was to carry a dangerous weapon when you went to commit this crime in which you were accompanied, and that afterwards you appear to have acquired another such weapon found on your arrest. That is also not a positive sign. You do have positive aspects to your character, as those who have written to the court have explained. For example, you cared for your sister who is autistic and your home following your mother's cancer diagnosis. I am unsurprised that the author of the pre-sentence report recognises that you still pose a risk of causing further harm to others, but like her, I do not conclude that you are a dangerous offender according to the statutory test. Arson is aggravated by the use of an accelerant, and this being a group offence committed at night. It is an offence with a terrorism connection, and this provides some moderate further aggravation beyond the serious consequential economic and social impact of the offence for the reasons I've explained. I do not find a significant degree of planning or premeditation in your case, nor do I find that multiple people were endangered. The risk to some life is reflected, as I say, in the aggravated nature of the offence itself. You have previous convictions, including for robbery, and they are an aggravating feature. The bladed article offence is category A2, as it was a knife, and you took it with you when you went with others to set the fire. This was, in my judgment, because you anticipated that there may be trouble, or you may need it to help you get away. Because you have a previous conviction for the same offence, I must impose a minimum penalty of 6 months imprisonment, but the appropriate sentence would be beyond that term in any event, because of the context in which you armed yourself, namely while committing an offence of aggravated arson. It is appropriate for that sentence to be served consecutively. By way of mitigation, you admitted simple arson on the 25th of October last year, but denied the aggravated offence. You admitted possession of the knife, which is correctly described as a zombie-type knife, in the first opportunity at the Crown Court on the 4th of October 2024, and you are entitled to a reduction in sentence of no more than 20%. That sentence must be consecutive. Age 22 at the time, I do not find you to be a dangerous offender or impose a serious crime prevention order for the reasons I've already set out. I must sentence Ugnius Asmena for aggravated arson. The arson is aggravated by use of an accelerant, this being a group offence committed at night, and the fact that you recruited a driver who was acquitted of knowing involvement at the trial. I do not find a significant degree of planning or premeditation in your case, and again, nor do I find that multiple people's lives were endangered, the risk to some life being reflected in the offence itself. This offence has a terrorist connection, and it provides some further moderate aggravation for the reasons I've explained. I've seen a pre-sentence report dated the 22nd of October 2025, and I bear in mind your previous good character. You were aged 19 at the time of the arson. The report explains your particularly difficult background and family situation, which I will not embarrass you by repeating in court. It was apparent during the trial that you were effectively homeless when you were recruited to the arson plan. I accept that you are less mature than your peers of the same age, and I've considered whether in the light of that, if you are to find yourself in impecunious circumstances again, I can be satisfied that the test for dangerousness has been met. Well, I bear in mind that I will be passing a terrorism sentence, and in the end I've concluded that the test is not met. Will you stand up, please, the three of you? The sentences I must impose demonstrate that the true price of what might seem like easy money. The principal aims of sentencing in your cases are punishment, deterrence, and public protection. I must impose a special sentence for offenders of particular concern. Nii Kojo Mensah, for the offence of aggravated arson, the sentence is 10 years imprisonment, comprising 9 years custody and 1 year on licence. Jakeem Rose, for the offence of aggravated arson, the sentence is 9 years detention, comprising 8 years custody and 1 year on licence. For the bladed article, the sentence is 10 months detention consecutive. Ugnius Asmena, for the offence of aggravated arson, the sentence is 8 years detention, comprising 7 years custody and 1 year on licence. You will each serve the whole of the custodial term for the offence of arson, and you will each be subject to notification requirements for 15 years. Would you please go down? I have to sentence Dylan Earl for aggravated arson in relation to the warehouse in East London, further aggravated by both a terrorist connection in accordance with Section 69 and the foreign power condition in Section 69A. He's also to be sentenced for preparatory conduct contrary to Section 18 of the National Security Act, concerning what I've described as the planned violence against a Russian dissident businessman and his premises. The maximum sentence for that offence is life imprisonment. In addition, for possession of cocaine with intent to supply, which also carries a maximum of life imprisonment, and possession of criminal property, namely £20,070, which has a maximum of 14 years imprisonment. I have seen a pre-sentence report dated the 8th of July 2025. I note what is said about difficulties in your later childhood and the habit you had got into of living online and abusing drugs and alcohol while living at home with your parents. You presented yourself to the author of the report and to others who reported on you as someone who was groomed into committing these offences. In light of all the evidence I have seen during the trial and since, I'm not able to accept that categorisation of your lifestyle or your mode of engagement with the Wagner Group. Spending a lot of time connected to the internet rather than to other human beings in the real world is of benefit to some people for whom it can be a source of companionship when circumstances or personality mean their lives are very restricted. But the fact that someone deliberately chooses to immerse themselves online in place of real-world friendships that bring home to them how, in a healthy democracy where civil liberties are enjoyed, we are each responsible for living lawful lives that benefit the whole community or at least do no harm, is not mitigation. Furthermore, the facts indicate that the encapsulation of your life as a sad and hermit-like and incapable of real-life person are not entirely accurate. You had a job working for your father, and you were running a successful Class A drug dealing operation. Turning to the important statutory test for dangerous offenders, I bear in mind this is the first time that you are before the courts. The provisions I apply are in sections 227 and 262 of the Sentencing Act, as you were 20 at the time of the arson. As I have said, from the facts of these offences and everything I know about you, including from your pre-sentence report, I reject the mitigation that you were tempted by Privet Bot and Lucky Strike because you were easy prey, a friendless, nihilistic youth susceptible to being targeted. You had an active drug-dealing enterprise underway at the time you became involved with the Wagner Group, and some of the jottings found by the police indicate that this was highly profitable. Psychiatric and psychological assessments on you show that you have average intellectual functioning and no psychiatric symptoms. You have periods of depression, have some traits of autism related to poor social functioning, and some degree of ADHD, but not a severe form. I'm also not persuaded that you were an easy puppet groomed by Privet Bot. There is certainly evidence that, as many people do online, you exaggerated your prowess, your contacts, and your experience. That kind of boasting was obviously false, and some of the responses from the Russian profiles indicated that they realized that. But you really believed you were having traction with something significant, and you threw yourself into it. I am sure that the truth lies somewhere in between the exaggerated importance you ascribed to yourself at the time and the wholly pathetic character presented to me in mitigation. What does that lead to? It means that I'm sure you were prepared to use your contacts to make money, and you didn't mind who you were doing it for. You expressed some ideological approval of Russia's aggression, but that may have been role play. I find that your primary motivation was not due to being groomed or manipulated by the Wagner proxies, but simple and ugly greed. I've considered the dangerousness provisions with care, and although you are young, I do find the test satisfied. I have attempted a holistic assessment of your current state, reading all the background material about you carefully, particularly the pre-sentence and other reports. I have to reject the account you gave to the probation officer that your family was unaware of your offending and substance abuse. The police found a handwritten ledger in which you referred to over £200,000 in the possession of your mother. Her account is frozen. I do not predetermine the outcome of the confiscation proceedings, but this evidence, together with the wide-ranging evidence of your contact with others, sending drugs to others, and your ability to engage Reeves and pursue others, including Evans, for the Hyde and hedonism attacks, indicates someone with much more agency than you have portrayed. In reaching that conclusion, I have refreshed my memory of the messages you sent. I do not reject entirely your account and that of your sister and others of you being bullied and removed from school and enduring a degree of social isolation at times. These aspects of your history, personality, and psychological makeup may explain why you were attracted to the malign influence of Privet Bot and Lucky Strike, but that does not diminish the responsibility you have for what you chose to do and the significant risk of causing serious harms to others, which I find you pose should you commit further specified offences of the type you are planning to once you are released from custody. On the other hand, a lack of a strong ideological adherence may reduce the likelihood of your being engaged in the same way again. And this is an assessment of future risk, which it is often difficult to accomplish in the case of someone who is young. The author of the pre-sentence report suggests that there has been a substantial change of mindset and attitude on your part, and time may show that this will last. You've used your time in custody well, and there are promising signs of a change of attitude to the future. I'm not bound by the opinion in the pre-sentence report, although I give it due respect. I also note that the opinion is nuanced and suggests you are now less willing to go back to your pro-criminal lifestyle or engage in crime with a degree of harm to satisfy the dangerousness test. However, that is within a custodial setting and while you await the outcome of this case. I'm driven back to the nature of the offences you have committed. I cannot make a safe conclusion that you are a transformed individual, and the very significant risk you posed at the time of your arrest has dissipated sufficiently to remove the significant risk you pose. You pleaded guilty on the 24th of October 2024 to arranging the damaging by fire of the warehouse in what you knew from images provided to you was an urban area with houses close by. You were reckless on that occasion as to endangering life. However, it was an offence committed for a foreign power, and it was a crime with a terrorism connection. There was significant planning on your part. It was a group offence at night. I do not find that multiple people were endangered. The risk to some life is reflected in the aggravated nature of the offence itself. You told Dr. Farnan, the psychiatrist who prepared a report on you, that you received €5,000 in cryptocurrency for the arson. You've also admitted at the hearing on the 25th of October engaging in conduct in preparation for the commission of acts involving serious violence against a person, endangering the life of a person, and or creating a serious risk to the health or safety of the public in the United Kingdom for or on behalf of a foreign power. The evidence from the London Fire Brigade is that there would have been a risk to life from the arson attack on the Russian dissidents' business premises although because of the nature of the buildings and fire protection processes, multiple fatalities were unlikely to result. It would have been still greater in the event of an attack using explosives. While I do not ignore the fact that you expressed a hope not to cause harm to people, and I have referred to some of those messages, the bottom line is you recognise that there was a risk of very serious harm, as in fact there would be. That did not put you off. You did not succeed because you were arrested. The Hyde restaurant has a bakery which is operative at night, as well as 14 flats above, and the Hedonism wine shop has 20 flats in the building above. Based on the nature of the two offences I have to deal with you for, in this respect, and all the other matters I've rehearsed, you are a dangerous offender. Having reached that conclusion, I've also concluded that given the alternative disposals available, detention for life is not justified, and nor is a special terrorism sentence. In the absence of an offence-specific guideline, I have considered the overarching principles guideline and the guideline for the parallel offence, contrary to Section 5 of the Terrorism Act 2006. Some of the reasoning behind the Section 5 offence guideline is encapsulated in the Crown and Caha 2016 EWCA Crim 568, which predates it. I consider your culpability as high. You are playing a leading role in terrorist activities and preparing to take further action against individuals, whether by kidnapping or causing serious damage to property. And the harm to life that putting your preparation into effect was likely to cause overall was less than high, because you were primarily intending to cause serious harm to property, albeit, as I've noted, you appreciated a risk to life. The risk was at its highest of multiple deaths risked, but that was not very likely to occur. Your plans were moderately close to completion. You had a target, you had arranged effective reconnaissance, but they were not sophisticated. As you knew from the experience of East London, such plans could come together at very short notice. And so I do find that were it not for apprehension, the activity was very likely to have been carried out. You were a ready amplifier of the Wagner Group's propaganda, and you shared it with others online. There is some evidence, as I've noted, in your messages of ideological commitment, but this may well have been role-playing, so I discount it, and that makes the offence marginally less grave. Mitigation is limited to your previous good character and aspects of your unhappy childhood and upbringing. I've given this feature weight, and I recognise the impact it can have on the life chances and outlook of a young person. In my judgment, these sentences should not be discounted substantially because of your age of 20 at the time of most of the offending I must deal with you for. These offences are serious, and I do not find that you are the victim of exploitation. But you have no previous convictions, as I've said, and that is mitigation, as are your guilty pleas. On the 14th of March 2025, you pleaded guilty to possession of 885 grams of cocaine with intent to supply it to others on or about the 10th of April 2024, the date of your arrest. You also admitted possession of criminal property at the same hearing. When you were arrested, your phone contained a screenshot of cryptocurrency holding £58,425 and the images of cash bundled in approximately £60,000, £40,000 and £75,000. An expert in drug dealing has formed the opinion that you were engaged in wholesale drug trafficking. The starting point in the drugs guideline is achieved at leading role and harm category 2, although I must allow for the lesser quantity of drugs found than that category suggests. On the other hand, there is evidence of a course of drug supply as background, engaging larger quantities. The starting point of 11 years, when reduced by a quarter to allow for your guilty plea, and moderately for your age, gives a notional determinate term of 7 years, 6 months. But I must also have regard to totality and the personal mitigation, including good character, that I have already discussed. The money laundering sentencing guideline applies to the offence of possession of criminal property. I agree that the offence is one at category A5, which has to be somewhat tempered, given that the indicative figure for that category is more than double the amount you held. The starting point will be 3 years custody. You pleaded guilty, and I've regard to totality and the other features I've mentioned. In your case, Earl, I do impose a serious crime prevention order because in the particular circumstances of your case, the offence of aggravated arson is sufficiently serious to be treated as if it were specified in Part 1 of Schedule 1 to the Serious Crime Act 2007. I'm also satisfied that the order will protect the public by preventing, restricting or disrupting your involvement in serious crime in England and Wales, but I make the order in the terms requested for a period of 5 years, albeit you will be in custody for all that time. I have to sentence Jake Reeves for aggravated arson. He's also to be sentenced for agreeing to accept a material benefit, namely money, that was to be provided by or on behalf of a foreign intelligence service, when he knew or ought reasonably to have known that this was the origin of the money. As I've said, this is an offence contrary to Section 17, subsection 2 of the National Security Act. The maximum sentence is 10 years imprisonment. The arson, again, is aggravated by the use of an accelerant, and this being a group offence committed at night in which you took a leading role, albeit you didn't go to the scene yourself. There was a greater degree of premeditation in your case than in those who carried it out. This was a crime with a terrorist connection. You took a leading role. It was a group offence, as I have said. I do not find that multiple people were endangered. The risk to some life is reflected in the aggravated nature of the offence itself. You are to be sentenced on the basis that you did not know the arson was to be set on fire on behalf of a foreign power, but learnt that subsequently, and with that knowledge continued to plot with Earl to arrange the attacks in central London and to intending to accept money for them from the Wagner Group. I've seen a pre-sentence report dated the 15th of October. You told the probation officer you were to be paid £8,000 for arranging the arson, which you were told by someone online was being committed against a bad person. You were a heavy user of ketamine at the time, although this did not inhibit your employment at Gatwick Airport. Afterwards, you were told by Earl that the job had not been up to Wagner standards and you would not be paid. You then strung Earl along, and that was why he engaged in the messaging with Mensah and Earl. That's why you engaged in the messaging with Mensah and Earl about the proposed attacks in Mayfair. This is what you said to the author of the report, and to that person you presented as an easily influenced and naive young man. You were 22 at the time, so not a callow youth, but since being remanded in custody, you've been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Despite having a job and a secure home, you needed money for ketamine, and this was the motivation for the offences that I must sentence you for. I've read Dr. Baron Cohen's assessment, and I conclude that in your case, the guideline for sentencing offenders with developmental disorders or neurological impairments is particularly relevant. I find there is some reduction in your culpability due to your neurodiversity, age, and lack of maturity compared to your peers. I've also taken account of your previous good character, which is supplemented by the many eloquent letters written to the court by those who know you well. I repeat, I have read them all. You have written an articulate letter to the court, which I've also read and take account of. I bear in mind your lack of previous convictions. You pleaded guilty, as I've said, to both offences in November of last year. There was no basis of plea, but I sentence you on the basis that you may have hoped to persuade or trick Earl into paying you what you felt you were owed for the arson when you engaged in discussions with him about the Hyde and Hedonism attacks and on their owner. But I also have to bear in mind that you recruited Mensah for that second mission as well as the first, and you sent him a video of an explosive. The sentences will be consecutive. I do impose a serious crime prevention order because in the particular circumstances of your case, the offences of aggravated arson and agreeing to accept a material benefit from a foreign intelligence service are sufficiently serious to be treated as if they were specified in Part 1 of Schedule 1 to the Serious Crime Act 2007. I'm also satisfied that the order will protect the public by preventing, restricting or disrupting your involvement in serious crime in England and Wales. I make the order in the terms requested for the period of 5 years, albeit you will be in custody. I have to sentence Ashton Evans for offences of possession of a controlled drug of Class A cocaine with intent to supply, contrary to Section 5(3) of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, and for failing to disclose information about terrorist acts between the 19th of March and the 23rd of May 2024, contrary to the Section 38B of the Terrorism Act 2000. The maximum sentence for that last offence is 10 years custody. You admitted during cross-examination at the trial that once Earl had been arrested and you had seen an online article about it, you realised that what you knew might be of assistance to the police, that your phone contained material that would be of assistance in the investigation of an act of terrorism. Nonetheless, you persisted in your denial of the offence that you've been convicted of. I find the terrorism offence to attract Category 1A in the guideline. This is because the information you held was very significant. You knew the media handles used by Earl, you knew his telephone number, at least part of the location of the warehouse attack, and the identity of the Mayfair targets, as well as the nature of the planned attack. Although much of the communications between you and Earl has been deliberately destroyed, I am able to be sure that well before Earl's arrest, you were aware that you had significant information to do with terrorist acts perpetrated or planned on behalf of Russian interests to disclose. And even after Earl was arrested, you failed to do so until you yourself were arrested. The harm was of the highest level, as it risked endangering life and was intended to cause very serious damage. The guideline starting point is 7 years custody. You pleaded guilty to the drugs offence. I regard you as playing a significant role as a street-level dealer who purchased from Earl. The harm category is 3. The starting point is 4.5 years custody. You have previous convictions, but in the circumstances I've been shown, I do not treat them as aggravating features, particularly given your age. The offences are of unlawful wounding and possession of a bladed article in 2022. Subsequently, in 2023, you were convicted of another possession of a bladed article and assault, resulting in detention. And you were on licence from that sentence when you committed the drug dealing offence. That aspect does not aggravate the drugs offence. That aspect does potentially aggravate the drugs offence, but I do not increase the term in order to allow for the totality principle, as I have in any event. I've read the letters written to the court which speak of your positive qualities. It's plain that you got involved in this period of offending, that until you got involved in this period of offending, you had the potential for a bright future, and you may yet achieve that. I do not find the statutory test for dangerousness met in your case. I reduce the sentence moderately for both offences I have to deal with due to your age of 19 at the time of the offences. And the sentences for failure to disclose and the drugs offence have to be consecutive. You stand up, please, the three of you. In your cases, the sentences must send a clear and unequivocal signal to you and all other potential candidates that engaging with online entities offering money for crime aimed at undermining the safety and interests of this country is not worthwhile. The principal aim of sentencing in your cases are punishment, deterrence, and public protection. Dylan Earl, for the offence of arson, which is aggravated by the foreign power condition and the terrorist connection, as well as a significant degree of planning and premeditation and the use of an accelerant, I impose an extended sentence of 9 years custody and 6 years extended licence. For the preparatory conduct contrary to the National Security Act, the sentence is 6 years custody consecutive. For the possession of cocaine with intent to supply, the sentence is 2 years consecutive. For possession of criminal property, the sentence is 1 year concurrent. The total sentence is 23 years, comprising 17 years custody and 6 years licence. The sentence for the preparatory conduct and drugs will be served first before the extended sentence for arson. You will serve the whole of the custodial period for the aggravated arson. You will be subject to notification requirements for 30 years. Jake Reeves, for the aggravated arson, the sentence is 10 years, comprising 9 years custody and 1 year licence as an offender of particular concern. You will serve the whole of that custodial term. For the offence of agreeing to accept a material benefit from a foreign intelligence service, the sentence is 3 years consecutive. You will be subject to notification requirements for 15 years. Ashton Evans, I must impose a special sentence for offenders of particular concern. For the failure to disclose, the sentence is 7 years detention, comprising a custodial term of 6 years and 1 year licence. You will serve the whole of that sentence. For the possession with intent to supply, the sentence is 3 years detention consecutive. You are subject to the notification requirements for 15 years. All right, thank you. You may go down.